You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Dr. Seager, thank you so much for coming on Power Athlete Radio. I am excited to jump in on cold immersion and cold plunging. I got a whole bunch of questions. I want to know about frequency, load, duration. We're going to talk a little bit about erections and really just hit you with a bunch of questions that I shot over earlier. The big one that we get quite often is cold plunging going to hurt my gains? If I'm in the gym and I'm banging weights and I'm trying to put on as much muscle as possible, how is cold plunging going to affect that? And more importantly, is it going to negate those gains? And then how can I effectively use cold plunging to continue to drive my performance and get as jacked as possible?
Yeah, this is a popular question. It's not exactly the right question. You can use cold plunge to blunt hypertrophy, if that's what you want to do. If you've just done a big workout and you're worried about DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness, you can get right into the cold plunge. You can slow down that inflammation response and you can bring yourself back to performance ready faster. But only do that when you're in some sort of a multi-day tournament and when you know you have to perform again. So the tennis players, this is good. If you're in the US Open and you just played 5 sets in the heat, get into that ice bath because you're not there to build muscles. You want to get yourself back ready for your next set the next day. Golfing, same thing. If you're in one of these multi-day tournaments and you just did 18 holes, get yourself into the cold plunge and bring yourself back to performance ready. Yes, it will blunt hypertrophy. Huberman's really good on this, and the science is consistent. He says, wait. If what you're going for is muscle gains, wait 4 hours after your workout to do your cold plunge. Allow the inflammation to do its work. But I have a different take. Pre-cool that exercise, whether you're doing it for training or for performance. When you pre-cool your workout, you will notice a boost in your peak muscle power output. You will notice that you've delayed fatigue. You're going to have more endurance as a result of cooling your muscles, doing some light exercise, and then doing your workout. And you will recover more quickly. So most people who are doing ice bath for recovery after they've gone to the gym are still doing it wrong. It's not going to help you build muscle if you're using it for recovery. If you're using it for performance, that's great. But if what you're worried about is training to build muscle, then pre-cool that workout instead of doing it afterwards.
So one of the ones that comes up when I did a little research is the blunting of hypertrophy with suppressing mTOR signaling and satellite cell activation. How real is that? Like, I mean, you know, like I think people really kind of fuck up a little bit, especially with hypertrophy, where they think about putting on muscle. Like, even if like the sets are to failure and you're working it in the perfect environment, you're only talking maybe a few grams. You know, like over the course of a year, if somebody puts 5 or 6 pounds of muscle on, it's something phenomenal. And, you know, I think the problem that we're running into in this internet age, and especially in social media, is we have a lot of people taking a lot of performance enhancing drugs. So people are like, I magically put on 30 pounds of muscle. I've lifted weights almost every single day of my life since I was 14 years old. So, I mean, I'm coming up on like, you know, what's that, 25, 30 years of lifting weights. And the amount of muscle that I've put on has always been in very, very small amounts, but it's been consistent. And so if you're putting on, let's say, you know, a few grams of muscle a week, I mean, is it really enough? You know, you're talking about, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 minutes of cold exposure spread out over 5 to 7 days. I mean, is it really enough to blunt that?
You and I have a mutual friend in Dr. Kirk Parsley. He's familiar with the cold. He's a former Navy SEAL. Now he's a physician, and he works inside the body. He'd probably be the right guy to ask about that. I work outside the body because I'm an engineer. My doctorate is a PhD, not an MD. And so I'm not the expert on mTOR signaling. And yet I think your instincts are really good here. Almost all the studies about cold for recovery are short term. So they'll grab a bunch of football players, or they'll get the Italian rugby team or something into the lab, and they'll take half of them and they'll work them like this and then do ice bath after. And then they'll take the other half and then they'll work them like this and they'll do just tepid water as a control. And then they'll say, well, who came back the next day better prepared? Or what did their physiology look like? These are short-term studies. And I think in the short term, they're pointing to something that is real. On the other hand, getting into the cold is wonderful for your metabolism. It stimulates mitobiogenesis, and not just in your brown fat, but throughout your body. It improves the energy production of your system. So let's say you just did a big workout and you got into the cold. Do you need to beat yourself up over like whatever minute fraction of your gains you just shaved off when you know you're doing something that's healthy for your metabolism and your body? No, I wouldn't worry about it. I think you're right that this is a fine-tuning kind of a thing to consider. However, you can do too much of anything. You can do too much exercise. You can do too much cold. You can do too much fasting. The hormetic stress curve is an upside-down U. If you don't do enough, you suffer. When you do the right amount, you get a lot of benefits. And then when you do too much, you go back down. The mentality that you've described of a lot of people, and I'm sure you saw them in college on the football team, I'm sure you saw them in training camp at the NFL, is more has got to be better because they're driven, they're ambitious, they're willing to sacrifice, and they might push themselves so far that whatever they do is going to damage themselves instead of benefit. Cold is like that too. A little bit will go a long way towards your metabolism. And if what works for you is you do a big workout, you get yourself all overheated, and you want to take your temperature down, hop in that ice plunge for a minute or two. The worst thing that could happen is those 2-a-day high school practices that you're on in August. We think of football as a fall sport, but of course the tryouts and the practices are happening in the late summer in Florida and in Texas, where it's hot and it's humid. There's a real risk that the brain will overheat. If you're in that condition, then get yourself in the ice bath and stop worrying about your gains.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Do you have limited access to equipment and restricted time to train? Let me introduce you to Lean Enable, our Bare Essentials training program for those lean on time and equipment. Don't let limitations hold you back. Get able-bodied with our adaptive training to tackle the daily demands of life. Head to powerathletehq.com/lean-and-able and claim your 7-day free trial today. Now back to the show. Okay. Let's get into a little bit of the idea of frequency, load, and duration. You know, let's say you have an individual who's maybe metabolically not that fit, a little bit metabolically broken, that's having a few issues, and they want to add cold plunging into their routine. What does that look like for an individual like that versus somebody who's maybe been doing it for a few years, that's pretty metabolically fit and, you know, doesn't have any issues? And then on the far spectrum, you know, somebody like Doc Parsley, who's just emotionally broken and dead inside. Like, what does the load and duration and kind of frequency look like for those three different parts of the population?
Parsley's not dead inside, but he does tell me he doesn't shiver. The cold doesn't faze him in the least. I think that guy's been through so many other more activating experiences that now he's acclimated. I don't know what it takes to get a rise out of Doc Parsley. Ordinarily, when you get into
I've only seen it once.
Right?
I've only seen him get upset once.
I hope it wasn't anything you did, John.
No, it was actually one of the guys that worked for me. Was not real kind and said some shit he shouldn't have. And I was actually waiting for Doc to beat his ass, and Doc exercised extreme restraint. And then after the fact, I'm like, I can't believe you didn't beat that dude's ass. And Doc was like, well, he's one of your employees. I'm like, dude, if anybody talked to me like that, I would have fucking stomped his face in. But
former employee.
Yeah, former employee, mind you. But I'm in the same boat. I have no shiver response. So what I will do is I'll get in for, you know, somewhere in like the 30s and get in for 4 or 5 minutes, and I get out and then I just stand there. And, you know, when the wind blows, especially when it's cold out, I kind of like wait on that shiver response. And I had a lady who was, you know, this big breath worker, ice cold kind of person, like be like, I don't believe you. And so she came over and did it. And she's like, no, I think you're metabolic or you're emotionally broken, the fact that you can't shiver. So I always wanted to get into that and ask you.
Most people are going to get into the cold and they'll have what's called a sympathetic nervous system response. So this is activation of their fight or flight reaction. That's a panic response. And it's coming through the nervous system. It's not biochemical. It's straight from the hypothalamus into their muscles and into their brown fat, saying we're in danger and we got to make heat. But you can acclimate to that. If you've done enough cold, if you've had enough experiences, then your nervous system is like, meh, we've done this before. Now, I've done a lot of cold, but I don't go 39. For me, that's boring. I got to see the ice chunks floating around in there for me to really get that knot in my stomach that says, I don't want to do this. This is why Joe Rogan goes at 33 degrees with the ice floating in the water. I do the exact same thing because I'm looking for that psychological benefit. I still want to ride that edge of doing something that scares me. I don't know if it's possible to scare Kirk, but for ordinary human beings, any temperature that gets that gasp reflex going is going to be the right temperature for you. If you're just starting out, you go cold enough to gasp and you go long enough to shiver. No matter what Google AI tells you about the optimum time and temperature, it's a bunch of nonsense. Everybody is at a different state of cold training, just like everybody's at a different state of weight training. You can't challenge yourself with the same weight on the bench press that you would recommend for someone like me. You'd say, hey, well, Professor Seager, let's see how strong you are. Let's start you at a level where maybe you can do 10, 12 reps, but the last 2 are going to be really hard for you. It's the same thing in the cold. You want to challenge yourself at the right level that makes you gasp, and you want to stay long enough to shiver. For you, that shivering urge, that might be way the hell out there past where ordinary people who are less acclimated to the cold would feel the urge to shiver.
I am interested. So for those new people that come in, what would you recommend? Like maybe 1 to 3 days a week and maybe 6 to 9 minutes of total frequency and somewhere at a temperature that they can handle, which might be 59 degrees or 60 degrees. I mean, obviously somebody like you that's much more adapted to the point that you have your own company that makes these insane units that actually produce their own ice. But for the average person who's trying to get into this, and then what do you think that you talked about that upside down curve, what do you think that sweet spot is for time in a week?
It used to be that medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in an adult human being. Kids have a ton of it. It's the brown fat that has all the mitochondria in it. That's what processes the energy to produce heat. Whereas white fat stores the energy, the brown fat burns it up. So the medical doctors thought, well, adults don't have any of it. The only way an adult can generate heat is through muscle shivering. But that wasn't true. For those adults who still get cold exposure, they still maintain brown fat, but it's only about 5% of the American population. So now that we know there is brown fat in adults, there's this huge explosion of research into what's it doing in the body. Metabolically, how does it work? How do you get more of it? And Susanna Soberg at the University of Copenhagen did a whole dissertation in brown fat. She found these Danish winter swimmers. So these were people who jump in the fjord. It's 4 degrees Celsius in there, and they swim around, and then they go to her lab, and she measures the brown fat using positron emission tomography. She asked them, how long do you go in? How often are you there? And she computed that the average was 11 minutes a week. Some people did it twice a week, some people every day, but on average, this group did 11 minutes a week, and they all had brown fat. That's not the same as a minimum effective dose. That's more like a maintenance dose. If you're trying to reverse your type 2 diabetes, if you're trying to correct a thyroid disorder, get into that cold every single day for 2 weeks, because it takes about 2 weeks to recruit new brown fat into the adult human body. When you have it, the brown fat will be in constant communication with your thyroid. Brown fat converts the inactive form of thyroid hormone into the active form. So it produces more of this active thyroid hormone in this way than the thyroid gland does. If you're working on a specific issue, get in every day. Then, after you have the brown fat, you can go to a maintenance dose of 2-3 times a week. Now, if you don't, have a thyroid disorder, if you're not type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic, if you're not working on insulin resistance, that Solberg rule of thumb, 11 minutes a week, break it up however you want, well, that's proven to maintain brown fat. You might be able to get away with a little bit less, but I go every single morning.
Is so you do it every single day, and at 33 degrees, it could be somewhere like you said, like this morning you did 45 seconds. Sometimes you go a little bit longer. Is there? Do you ever get to the point? I mean, you talked about in Arizona when it's real hot. Like, is there a benefit to maybe doing like a series of morning and night twice a day and shorter duration, kind of higher intensity, colder water more so than warmer water and sitting for longer periods of time?
There is for me. I'm not sure that there is for everybody, but dang it, Phoenix is the hottest city in North America. And I teach on the ASU campus in Tempe. Sometimes I'm walking in between the classes and it's 115 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a Morosco on campus. I have one at home. And just to cool down and give my brain a break, I'll get in a couple, 3 times a day during the summer. However, mostly it's once a day, unless I'm doing a photo shoot and I can't get the takes right or something. That's just some other reason. And one of those other reasons is stress. If, I don't know, maybe my director at ASU has called me up to bitch me out for something I put on Twitter because I got a big mouth, or maybe I'm in trouble because somebody complained I said something politically incorrect in class again. When I get that anxiety, the ice bath will take it away. And it doesn't take long. It's 15, 30 seconds. I'll be in there. And I'll start with the gasp reflex, but then I'll calm myself down. I will structure my breathing, box breathing, or just counting out my breaths. It doesn't matter as long as I'm in control of it. And the anxiety melts into the water. I start thinking, what was I even worried about? I get a call from my daughter saying she just backed into somebody's car in the parking lot. And I'm all like, but I taught you how to drive. You know better than this. Just get in the ice bath. And I'll say, well, you better leave a note. And it doesn't seem like it's any big deal anymore.
Nice. Okay. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit with some of the circulation, but one of the side or positive side effects that I experience is with a massive erection cold or post-cold plunging. I have talked to a few different people, and it turns out that this is a little more rare than I thought it was, but I've asked people, I'm like, do you get this? And they say, actually, no. But when I talked to Doc Parsley, he actually agreed and said, hey, this is a physiological effect that I've experienced with vascular rebound, nervous system shift, and nitric oxide release. But it was a great indicator of hormonal health and also the fact that you have good circulation down there. Is this something that's more common, or is it just a weird side effect reserved for people like me?
I hear this from a lot of readers, older readers especially. Maybe their mitochondria are in decline. But I might have a 65-year-old guy text me, and it's embarrassing. Men don't talk anywhere near enough about this kind of stuff. But he might say, hey, Professor, I'm waking up with erections that I didn't used to have anymore since I started the cold plunge. And I thought that part of my life was over. Is this normal? Totally normal. You should tell other men about your experience because they are not as metabolically well as you are. You should probably also talk to your wife about it. You should get her into the ice bath with you because the ice bath will stimulate synthesis of sex hormones. All sex hormones originate in the mitochondria. It is in the mitochondria that cholesterol is converted into what's called pregnenolone. And all the other sex hormones like testosterone and estradiol are downstream of pregnenolone. If you don't have enough mitochondria or your mitochondrial membranes aren't functioning very well, then you're not going to have testosterone. That is the lust hormone in both men and in women. And it's that which allows you to be aroused, which causes you to lust for sex with your loved one. However, physiologically, there are men who are aroused but just can't maintain an erection. That's not a question of testosterone. It's a question of their endothelial cell function. These are the cells that line the blood vessels that supply blood to the penis. for a man to maintain an erection, he has to have good blood pressure in his penis. And the best way to do that is to open up all the blood vessels that connect the heart to the penis. That means you need vasodilation. Now, the ice bath is vasoconstriction, so you might think that's going in the wrong direction. That's where we get the Seinfeld jokes about shrinkage. But when you get into the ice bath and you stimulate mitobiogenesis, you will promote mitochondrial function in the endothelial cells. It is those mitochondria that produce nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is responsible for vasodilation. So the nitric oxide will relax the smooth muscle tissue, allow those blood vessels to open up, and now the blood can flow freely into the corpus cavernosum in your penis. Erectile dysfunction is the first clinical marker of metabolic disorder. So those men who are beginning to experience ED need to talk with one another and their doctors about what's going wrong in their mitochondria. They might not have lost their interest in sex, but their mitochondria is losing the ability to produce the nitric oxide required for their sexual performance. It's no accident that the ice bath improved sex function and improved satisfaction. In women, the testosterone is still synthesized in mitochondria, but of course, it's not in the testicles. They have ovaries instead. Ovaries are responsible for only about 25% of a woman's total testosterone. And it turns out that testosterone is the dominant sex hormone in women, just like it is in men. We don't know this because the units in the lab report are reported differently. That is, estradiol and testosterone have different units, and you have to convert them before a woman is even going to realize she's got more testosterone in her body. A healthy woman has 3 or 4 times the testosterone in her body than she'll have estradiol. And it's the lust hormone in her too. But the testosterone is made principally in the skin, in the fat, and the adrenal glands of the woman. So you get in, and when you get out and you rewarm, you feel aroused. She's going to feel aroused when she's in the ice bath. I have video of this, John. I've experienced this with a woman that I used to date. And it's very confusing for the man when they get in with the woman. And you know, at about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, she's starting to lean in and she's feeling very affectionate at a time when the man hasn't got the same surge of testosterone. He needs to do a little exercise and rewarm. But if you ever find yourself in this situation, take my advice and go with it. Make out a little bit. You're gonna restore your circulation, and then you'll be able to enjoy that your wife has done it with you.
Nice. Well, makes a claim for having a large ice deal similar like your Moroso. Like mine's, I think I have a, ice barrel. So I have like a ice barrel that you sit in. The reason I went with that was because Texas is so egregious with heat and everything. And I didn't have a covered area. So it was plastic. And I figured if this thing melts, I'll be fine with it. But it's kind of a 1-person deal. So make a claim for actually having a bigger one. The other thing I wanted to jump into is, what does the science look like on the frontier? Like there's so many significant gaps in the current research on cold exposure, like the long-term effects, hormonal response, and nervous system remodeling. But like, what are we going to learn in the next decade to either validate or upend this? And like, what do we know today that you see happening in the future?
There is a lot of science. I wrote this book called Uncommon Cold. There are like 600 scientific citations about cold plunge therapy, its benefits and its risk and protocols in that book. Most people, I found out, wanted to read about testosterone and sex hormones. So I followed it up. You can get this one on Amazon. This is Uncommon Testosterone. And there's 250 citations in there too. There's some overlap between the two books, but we know a lot. What we don't know enough about yet is the essential role of brown fat in the body as a secretory organ. Brown fat is associated with increased levels of neuroprotective factors. So BDNF is one, FGF21 is another, and RMB, they all have these acronyms. Cold is really good for the brain, but we don't know exactly how. We know that For example, Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. We know that when you become insulin resistant and the cells in the brain become insulin resistant, you lose cognitive function, which can decline into dementia. What we don't know yet enough about is how to heal traumatic brain injury using cold exposure to promote neurogenesis, to promote repair, to promote remyelination of the nervous system. And I think that as people get more into their cold research, especially at colder temperatures, when they stop thinking about how to get, I don't know, an extra tenth of a second out of a sprinter, and they start thinking about how to deal with people who have had multiple concussions or traumatic brain injury, the research is going to get more difficult to do and a lot more rewarding. So we sent Morosco over to the Lithuanian Sports University, where they've done some of the best work on cortisol and cold exposure. They were using what I would call cool temperatures. Now they can get their people in at, there they would say 1 degree C with the ice floating around, and see what happens to the nervous system and the brain while they're doing it.
So what do you think is happening on like on a neurological level? I mean, there's probably an autonomic response of relaxation, but do you believe, it's funny, as I was doing research for this podcast, I feel like there's science and then there's a lot of, I don't know, magic. It would be an easy way that I read. And the thing I appreciate about your newsletter and your information is it's very science-based. Like, hey, this is the physiology, this is research, what we know. Whereas I feel like there's this completely other side of it where the only thing I can equate it to is magic. And people are talking about it's rewiring the brain, and it's, there's increasing mitochondrial density, and it's doing all these things. But in reality, if you take a step back, and I feel like whenever I look at anything, I always try to look at it from an evolutionary model, like through the evolutionary lens. And something that's been, discussed, and we've gone back and forth on text, is the advent of bathing in warm water is really only within like maybe the last 70 or 80 years. I mean, for the entirety of our human existence, we've bathed in cold water, and primarily running water. I mean, within a stream or a lake. So you're talking about cold water, and the advent of actually having, on tap hot water is really just very, very frequent. I mean, or very new in a lot of ways. And, I know, we were talking about, like when my dad, World War II hits, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and he's a little kid, and they moved to California. It was the first time they actually had a hot water heater. And he was like, man, the novelty of turning on the faucet and hot water coming out was something they hadn't seen. So for the majority of our human existence and for the entirety of it, we've bathed in some form of cold water. Why is it now that people are so wrapped up in the physiology, or is it something that's just inherent within our DNA?
I think that until recently, we could take cold water exposure for granted. Of course it happens. My grandparents, growing up in Maine, hot running water. I remember when my dad brought a color TV home. I was a little kid. It was the early 70s. What a novel thing that was. Felt like we'd made it, Now I got any program I want to watch on my cell phone. Well, hot running water was like that to our grandparents. It was like that color TV miracle of you twist a tap and then the hot water comes out. The human experience with hot running water is very brief, whereas we have hundreds of thousands of sort of physiological experiences with cold water. Most people don't realize that the human physiology is meant to get wet. That is, we are meant to live at the water's edge and to be in the water all the time. We have downward facing nostrils as one example. And why is that? So we can dive without the water going straight up our nose and into our brain. We have subcutaneous fat like the whales and the manatee and the seals. Chimps don't have that. Bonobos don't have that. Human beings have that because that's an aquatic mammalian feature. And our babies are born with an instinct to swim because our grandmothers, our great grandmothers used to give birth in the water. That water was cold. The oldest human fossils found are in East Africa. And you might say, well, that's the equator, that's where it's warm. But there are 4 modern glaciers in the mountains on East Africa. And you go back 70,000 years to an ice age that caused a bottleneck in the human population, where humans were kind of eking out an existence at the water's edge, fishing in it, foraging in it. That water was cold. We're built for cold water immersion. The heat is very dangerous for us, but the cold is very healthy. It's only in the last 100 years that we've gotten away from it. Now we have heated leather seats and we have triple plane glazed windows or whatever, so we can live in, climate controlled environments. We're disconnected from the sun, we're disconnected from the forest, and we're disconnected from the cold water. And that's part of what's killing us.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to mess it up, but it's the Bayou people that are from the Philippines, or Malaysia, Philippines. They call them the sea nomads that have evolved where, they have a massive spleen. They can stand underwater for 13 minutes. And I think it was when they measured their spleen, it was 50% bigger. They rupture their eardrums as kids. I mean, they live their entirety in the water, and the adaptations we're seeing in them are pretty amazing to, not only humans are extremely malleable, but I feel like this adaptation is probably the adaptation we had that we have since de-evolved over time.
I think you're onto something. What you're pointing to is an extreme example of human physiology pushed past whatever our normal expectations could be. And it can happen fast, but they're not the only ones. There's also this Korean group of women, and I'm forgetting the name, but the resources in the cold water, that is the fish, the shellfish, the plants that live there, are extremely valuable. They've helped make people what they are. Your brain is made of a fatty acid called DHA. Other fatty acids like AA, or arachidonic acid, if I'm getting it right, are essential to your brain development. And we would not have, as human beings, the most enormous brains if they weren't being fed by the fat that we get from the fish and the shellfish and the plants in the cold water. And so for tens of thousands of years, it's been worth it for people to go find that lobster or go spear that fish or go foraging in the water, because that's where the best food resources for our brain were always found. Some of those people carry on that tradition today, and they're an example of what the human body is capable of doing.
I believe my final question was going to be about stress and resilience. I know we talked a little bit about your daughter backing up and hitting a car and you not knowing what to do. But,
Oh, I knew what to do. I just wish I'd done it earlier.
I have twin girls that are 14, and we've started doing some driving lessons, and it's going to be interesting.
Good job.
Yeah. No, well, I feel like I started driving when I was probably 11 or 12. We would start with cleaning the cars and back them in. We'd take them around to the point where I think I was maybe.
I started my son at 11 years old. I'm like, look, somebody's got to drag this infield, hook up the infield rake and get in the car. He had to learn how to drive a stick. Yeah. It's good.
Yeah, no, it is good. And so for the girls, obviously maybe there's a program we can put together with cold water immersion to help build resilience to teach your daughters to drive. But you've written about cold immersion building resilience through the anterior simulated cortex. Am I saying that right?
Look, when Huberman ran that phrase out for his podcast with David Goggins, I had to practice it for a half an hour before I could even record. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex. I didn't get the whole medical vocabulary that Doc Parsley has because I went to school for engineering. But Huberman made this really interesting point with David Goggins. He said, when you do something that you don't want to do or you don't enjoy, but you're motivated for other reasons to do it, it will grow this part of your brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And he gave the example in athletes, it's bigger because they're accustomed to training past the point of discomfort. And then he talked about the example of the cold plunge. If you love the cold plunge, Huberman says, then your anterior mid-cingulate cortex isn't going to grow at all. And maybe you get in at 49 degrees and you think, oh, this is great. I love this. Well, you got to get to a colder temperature because Huberman claims that anterior mid-cingulate cortex is the seat of the will to live. He says that's the part of the brain in which willpower resides. It will push you to do those things that you must do even though they're uncomfortable, even though you don't like them, even though it feels like it's going to kill you to do it. This is like in our muscles, we have to take them to the gym and we have to work them out, and then they're going to get sore. And some people sort of like that feeling, I guess. I'm not one of them, but I've never regretted a workout. I've never regretted an ice bath. It's only beforehand that I have this urge to procrastinate. So what gets us over that urge? We must practice it. We must strengthen willpower through practice so it becomes more automatic. Well, now, resilience is not what happened to you. Resilience is your capacity to adapt to what happens to you. We get this stress response, and there's two different stories that we can tell ourselves. One story is, oh, this stress is killing me. And the other story is, well, this is hard. And this is going to require me to do this and this and this. And I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to see if I can get through it. Kelly McGonigal. Kelly McGonigal is a faculty member at Stanford. She wrote a book called The Upside of Stress. And she cited research that indicated people who tell themselves the story that the stressful experience is difficult and it's worth it and they're going to get through it, they live longer. The people who tell themselves that the stress is killing them, they're right. They die quicker because the story you tell yourself about your experience is more important than your experience. When you voluntarily get into the ice water and you're telling yourself the story, I don't like this, and that's why I'm going to do it, because I want to get better at the things that are uncomfortable for me. That's exactly what happens. You become more calm under pressure. You become more resilient to all the different things that can happen to you in your life. And you get to tell yourself the same story in any situation. Well, this is going to be difficult, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to be better off for having done it.
So if you enjoy cold plunging, does that make a case for lying to yourself and being like, oh, I hate this so much, this is terrible, and then you get in?
No, it makes a case for going cold. It makes a case for turning down the temperature on your ice bath to the point where you hate it again. There's this great video of Joe Rogan in his backyard in Austin. And, you know, Austin gets like 1 week of winter every year or something. I know you're in Texas, but I'm not sure.
No, I'm in Austin, Texas. And it's a godforsaken place. I've said this over and over again. It is the weirdest weather I've ever been around. It's hot, like, we are in, obviously, the end of October. Last weekend, not last weekend, the weekend before, we had our Power Athlete Collective, and John McPhee came and was teaching us a shooting course, and it was 94 degrees on the range. And so it'll be in the high 90s, mid 90s, all the way to the end of October. And then we'll get like about a week of fall, which we're actually getting now. It's probably like 60 or 70 degrees, and it's real pretty. It'll be like this for about a week. And then in about 2 weeks, we'll all of a sudden be at like 30 degrees. It is the weirdest place. It's hot or it's cold. And when it's hot, like I think a couple of years ago, we were 70 days in a row over 104 at like, 80, 90% humidity. So it's just, it's a godforsaken place. That's why I know Davy Crockett said, hey, if I owned hell and I owned Texas, I'd rent out Texas and live in hell. I know exactly what he means. So
then you probably remember it was snowing in January of 2024, and like the governor of Texas was worried about rolling blackouts and power failures and stuff like that. Joe sets up his phone, he goes into his backyard, and he's standing in his underwear over his Morozko in the flurries while it's full of ice. And he says, there is no part of me that wants to do this right now, which is why I do it. And he gets in. If you enjoy your ice bath, then make it colder. Make the air colder. Make the water colder. Get it to the point where it's taking you out of your comfort zone. There's something called stress inoculation. And it works like this. If someone's experiencing a fear, a phobia of spiders, then you will titrate exposure to them of spiders until they extinguish their fear response. So they might start out, they're sitting in like a psychiatrist's office, and they're just looking at pictures of spiders in a magazine. And gradually you up the exposure so that they can manage their response until they're in like Raiders of the Lost Ark and there's tarantulas crawling all over them. And I'm only exaggerating a little bit. This stress inoculation can inure your response to stress. The cold is like that. When you push yourself outside your comfort zone and you do that thing that you think is going to be miserable, it translates into other aspects of your life. Not only growing your anterior mid-cingulate cortex where the willpower resides, but also that story in your head. Instead of spinning a catastrophic phobia about the future, you're saying, you know what? I can get through this. I can break this down into steps. I can do it one step at a time. And the next thing you know, you're performing better on your final exam, or you're performing better in your tryout, or you're performing better at the big meeting that you had at work, because you've calmed yourself down rather than letting your anxieties take charge of your nervous system.
So through all your research and everything that you've done, like, what do you think the recommendation for people, like we talked about, like, hey, I want to get into this. What do you think, like, the best way to start is? Is it in your bathtub with just go getting some ice bags? I'm just wondering, like, maybe going down to Tractor Supply and buying like a horse trough and getting that. Like, I've seen a million different, and then people kind of take up a next step and get a dedicated deal with a chiller. And then obviously, you guys with the Taj Mahal of ice deal, where it's actually a unit that's producing its own ice and able to keep it at an amazing temperature, which when I got in Doc Parsley's, I have to say, I get mine pretty cold, and it does have kind of a continuous water, but there's a dramatic difference of getting in cold water opposed from getting in water that has sheets of ice in it.
I agree. Yeah. Part of it is psychological and part of it is thermodynamic. But I can tell you, I didn't start that way. I started with cold showers. I'd read a book that said cold showers are going to toughen you up. And I'm like, okay, I want to be tough. I'll take a cold shower. But I live in Phoenix, Arizona, John. The tap water is only like 60 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. And that was enough for me to be uncomfortable and get a gasp at that time. So I used to say, hey, go cold shower, fill up your tub with tap water. And this is a good one. Just fill up your tub from your cold water faucet and get in there. You'll probably feel the gasp reflex. And this might give you a sense of what the experience is like. But it has been, 7, 8 years since I started doing cold plunge therapy. And I'm no longer an advocate for starting slow. I think most people would like to say, well, I'm going to go outside in the wintertime in shorts and a t-shirt. I'm going to go for a walk. And this is healthy for them. But if you're working on something, if you're working on a thyroid disorder, or you're working on insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, if you're trying to manage an autoimmune condition like multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis or fibromyalgia, or Parkinson's for that matter, if you've got serious things, if you've got dementia or cognitive decline that you're trying to reverse, I don't want you to start slow. I want you to get a Morozko. Not everybody can afford a Morozko. Desert Plunge is a company in Tempe. Matt Kuiper is a friend of mine. He makes a much more affordable cold plunge option. It's not the same. You can't put Epsom salt in. It's not grounded, but it's only like $3,500. I think that's a good way to start too. I think when you are ready to get serious, you've got to have a machine so that you can control your temperature. If you start with like going down to the Quickie Mart and buying 200 pounds of ice, you're going to quit because it's such a pain in the ass to buy all that ice, especially if you live in a hot city like me and it feels like 15 minutes later it's all melted because your backyard is 115 degrees Fahrenheit. You won't do what's really difficult. But if you make it easy for yourself and you have one at home, you will get in there every day, a couple of minutes, scare yourself a little bit. You will build your insulin sensitivity. You will remodel the dangerous visceral fat into subcutaneous fat. You will boost your sex hormone levels, testosterone especially. You will change your body composition. And so I guess I don't want to discourage anybody from getting a little cold in their life, but if you're going to ask me the best way to get started, get yourself a reliable machine. Morozko is one, Desert Plunge is another.
You brought up visceral fat. We had Dr. Sean O'Mara on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and
he's great.
His information on visceral fat and the way he's attacking it and using MRIs and a bunch of like imaging within the abdomen. His contention is that the visceral fat around the heart is the major driver for all systemic inflammation and a lot of the problems that we're having today. And the idea that the jiggly fat, like the subcutaneous fat, is not nearly as damaging and causes the problems as visceral fat. Have you seen anything within your own research or just people that you've worked with where you've seen a reduction in visceral fat around the organs from frequent cold plunging?
I don't have data on people. Sean has these wonderful cross-sectional scans where he can show you people who are what he calls skinny fat. That is, they look thin, they might have a narrow waist, but there's no muscle in there. It's just all fat, and it's all inside their body rather than right underneath their skin, which would be the subcutaneous. I don't have those kinds of scans from my readers. Instead, what we have are clinical trials and animal models. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a good example of how dangerous visceral fat is. So this is fat that exists inside your liver. And when you get cold, without losing weight, without even changing your overall body composition, controlling for that, you will remodel the fat. Visceral fat will go down and subcutaneous fat will go up. One of the things that Sean doesn't emphasize enough is what caused the visceral fat? What are the conditions that led to the visceral fat? He's very good about showing you the association between visceral fat and adverse health outcomes like death. But how did you get in such a crappy condition? And it is a metabolic disorder. That visceral fat, I don't know exactly why the body is responding. Why is it depositing fat in and around your internal organs? What could it possibly be protecting itself against? And the answer is your metabolism is all messed up. And it's causing your body to make these maladaptive responses to too many seed oils in your diet, poor light hygiene, too many carbs without a break, without any fasting, without any ketosis. You're so metabolically messed up that your body has adapted in ways that are unhealthy. Sean and I had an exchange on Twitter, which really helped me with a certain section of the Uncommon Testosterone book called The Boner Bounce. Sean said one of the ways, without getting a super sophisticated scan, but one of the ways that you can see whether you're metabolically healthy is if you have outward markers of your pulse. He pointed to two of them. One was in the crook of the elbow. You can sometimes see your heartbeat because there is I'm trying to remember, an artery or a vein that will pulse with your heartbeat. And you can see it and you're like, oh, if I can see my pulse, I must be healthy. It's inside the elbow. And Sean will explain it better than me. But the other one, he said, is the boner bounce. When you get an erection, if your erection is popping up and down with your heart rate, it is another indication that you have good cardiovascular health. So I'm going back and forth with him. I'm like, oh, well, that explains a couple of things. I'm about 22% body fat, John. I'm a sedentary, obese college professor. And it is possible to have this distribution of subcutaneous fat, which is still metabolically healthy because exercise and cold have a lot of overlapping metabolic benefits. Cold in this way is an exercise mimetic. There's some things that exercise will do. Build cardiovascular endurance, for example. Cold won't do it. But there's some things that cold does that exercise won't do. Recruit brown fat to take care of your brain and to take care of your thyroid. So the ultimate is pre-cool your workout, then get your workout, use your sauna for recovery. You'll feel like Superman.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like, when we had Sean on the podcast, we went through a bunch of different things, like a little bit of fasting, sauna, cold exposure, aerobic exercise, lifting some weights, eating a, more what I like to say, like through that evolutionary lens, like we talked about, something similar to, one ingredient, something a little similar to the paleo diet. Like I had my good friend Rob Wolf on the podcast, who's also a good friend of Doc Parsley's, who's, credited with a lot of the, horsepower behind the paleo diet. And I still eat that way 80 to 90% of my diet. And it's because one, it's the easiest way for me to eat and the way that I've eaten for years. But adding in these little kind of levers like the sauna piece, I mean, since it's here in Texas, it's kind of wild. I like the sauna for heat inoculation. When we added the sauna and we started doing more sauna stuff, the summer wasn't nearly as bad as it's been in previous years. So I think there's benefits for that. But, there are these kind of extremities where, you're going up to 185 and then you're getting in the cold. Does this kind of lend claim that our bodies are designed to be extremely resilient and to test those boundaries of resiliency as a means to stay healthy? And that, this idea of homeostasis and keeping everything nice and calm and stable and healthy and cool and easy is just a fast track to death.
Yep. One of the worst things that's happened to our understanding of human physiology is the analogy with the machine. So the Industrial Revolution comes along, and we start using mechanical explanations to try and teach human physiology. When I was a kid, there was the Schoolhouse Rock series, and it's so catchy. You probably remember some of these songs like Conjunction Junction, What's Your Function? They were supposed to be educational for kids, and all of their information on health and human physiology was crap. They had this song trying to teach me that my nervous system is like a telegraph line. No, it's not, John. We are not machines. Machines are built to do the same thing every single time until they wear out. That's not what helps human beings. Human beings need variety. They need dark and they need light. They need feasting and they need fasting. You are much better off trail running over an uneven surface than you are, at the track at school going around in circles or something like that. Humans need variety. We need exercise and we need sleep. We need hot and we need cold. Because we're living creatures, we need it might feel extreme in today's modern age, but if you look at it through an ancestral lens, it's not extreme at all. What my grandparents used to consider hardship, we now consider therapy. You'd better believe my granddad was out splitting wood all fall so that he could keep his house warm during the summer, right? Now there's Instagram videos of guys splitting wood saying, I do this because it's good for my testosterone. And it is. But my grandfather would laugh. When he got a boiler, he's like, thank goodness, I don't have to split wood anymore. And all the sacrifices that he was making to make life better for me are magnificent. Now I got my heated leather seats in my SUV, and I bring a red light into my bedroom to recreate what used to be available when I was outdoors in the sunshine. There's something screwy about it, John. We were meant for the extreme experiences of the environment that our human physiology is built for, like our ancestors experienced it. Now we have this industrial, life that is surrounded by technology, disconnects us as if being comfortable all the time and having food all the time, having light all the time. We're convenient, but deadly.
Yeah, no, I mean, death through discomfort, or I'm sorry, comfort leads to, I guess, bad outcomes. But I think it was in what's his name, the guy that wrote the book Lifespan. He's been on Rogan a bunch. He's the English guy, kind of a little dude, talks about training his thighs a lot. But as I was reading through his book, one of the interesting pieces, and I actually kind of globbed onto it a little bit in that when he was discussing why these different kind of extremities work, he talked about gene expression, that when you put yourself into a situation where you're in these extremities and you're in a situation where you're thinking like, it's so cold, I'm getting this like, extremely nervous response where I'm going to die if I don't get out, or if I'm in the heat to the point where it's so hot I can't stand here another second, that when you put yourself in these situations, and it happens in training, it happens in a lot of different environments, you get a positive gene expression. And at that point, the genes are like, hey, we're in this together, we're going to fight this, and you have this, I guess you could say, this symbiotic relationship to be for survival. And if you don't do that, then the genes express in a negative way, where there's comfort, where obviously things are too easy. Let's get rid of this guy because he's not the pinnacle, the peak, or the top of our society, because obviously he's not doing anything of value. So I thought about the and you hear Cameron Haynes and you mentioned David Goggins and different guys where they talk about, go out and do something hard each day. And I've made the joke.
Yeah, you don't have to carry a rock up a mountain. These guys are extreme because it generates attention on social media, and it shows the ultimate capacity of the human body, and they want you to believe in your own capacity. But shoot, would you just park further away from the gym?
Well, I mean,
get a few extra
is it that easy? Like I've said this to on social media numerous times. I feel like if the hardest thing you do every day is get into 3 minutes of cold water, like we probably need to kind of readjust a little bit. And I wonder if that's for me, because cold water isn't necessarily a stressor. I feel super relaxed when I get in there. I take a deep breath and like I don't feel that. And maybe it's just I'm not going cold enough. Maybe I got to get a Moroso Forge and get it at 32, 33 degrees and try to really push it. But I feel like for a lot of people where, and I've seen people for years post all this stuff on social media with like, here I am in the cold plunge, like Joe Rogan over there, if that's the hardest thing Joe Rogan does, which I don't think it is, because I know he does jits and he trains and he does other things. But I feel like there's a certain badge of courage that people have attached to because we do not have hardship anymore in our lives.
I think the author that you're reading on the Lifespan book is onto something. What most people have been taught is that the DNA in their nucleus is like the chief executive of the cell. And it's not like that at all. The DNA's job is to create proteins. That is, they hold the information to create proteins. But how the hell do they know what proteins they're supposed to create? There's something called the epigenome that coats the DNA. And that's what turns a gene on or off. What controls the epigenome? That's the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the sensors that tell the DNA in your nucleus what to do. Mitochondria have their own DNA. You inherit it exclusively from your mother. It's not like sexual reproduction where you get this from your dad and that from your mom. And mitochondria exclusively from your mother. And the mitochondria sense your light environment and your metabolism. The food that you eat that goes through your gut is transferred into the metabolites that enter your bloodstream. It's your gut microbiome that converts your food into your bloodstream, where your mitochondria burn it up. That is, in respiration, they combine it with oxygen to generate energy. So your mitochondria know what's in your bloodstream, and your mitochondria are very sensitive to your light environment. It is your mitochondria that respond to that light environment by turning genes in your DNA on or off. Even if you can't change your genome, you can change the expression of your genome by altering your epigenome. And it is your mitochondria that do that for you. When you get into your cold, the mitochondria are stimulated, mitobiogenesis occurs, and the mitochondria, in constant communication with your genes, will change your epigenome. That is, turn on different genes that will make, for example, more heat shock protein or more cold shock protein for your body. As that flows through your body, your brain responds, your cells, the muscles respond. Your body can't help but respond to what the mitochondria are telling them to do. And this is one of the great misconceptions. We did the whole Human Genome Project. And what has that done for us? Nothing has come out of the Genome Project, because it's the mitochondria that govern the state of the body and the rate of aging, not the genes that are in your nucleus. And I wonder if the Lifespan author talks about that much.
Whenever I think about mitochondria, I always go back to, I think it was Dr. Warburg and the Warburg effect from the 40s. He won a Nobel Prize with the idea that cancer comes from the mitochondria get weak, they can no longer produce ATP. So then for the cells to survive, they go to this ancient pathway of basically using fermentation to stay alive. And they ferment, glutamine and sugar. And then those cells that use that fermentation process become cancer. And that original Warburg effect and the idea of, grounding and sun exposure and exercise and eating well and, not being obese was really his prescription. And they were going to create these Warburg centers. And then they realized they probably couldn't make money off of it. And there are probably some holes within it, because I think at the time we did not have the environmental poisoning that's happening in this country, out in Arizona. I don't know if you ever ran into a guy named Dr. Tom Incledon. Tom has a center called, his place is called Cosenta. He's over in Scottsdale. He treats a lot of cancer patients, and a lot of the cancers that he's dealing with, and a lot of these people, it comes from environmental things. And he goes, anytime you see anything where it says may cause cancer, it's because it does cause cancer. And he's like, whenever we talk about the rise of cancer, he goes, you can go back to, metabolic dysfunction. I mean, obviously obesity and a lot of these other things, but he goes, we're also at such a high load of environmental toxins that we've never had, to the point where we get that big deal happened. I think it was in Ohio, and they decided to hey, we'll just burn all this stuff, and all that stuff goes up into the environment. The clouds take it over, and then it rains, and now they're getting exposure to these chemicals hundreds of miles away where they wouldn't have been before. So as we get,
I think you're talking about the train derailment that they had there.
Yeah. I mean, so
it's a great example.
Yeah. I mean, so now we're getting into this, obviously it's not just mitochondrial dysfunction like it might have been 80, 100 years ago, but now with all the environmental load. So is there,
you'd be surprised.
Is there like a detoxing effect? I mean, one of the benefits for the sauna, which I like, is the fact that, you sweat it through, and then immediately when I get out of the sauna, I get in the cold plunge to, wash off anything that comes off. But is there a detoxing effect similar to sauna? Is there like a detoxing effect for the cold plunge? Is the body releasing toxins in a new way?
Nope, it's not the same. But don't think of it as detox. The DNA in your nucleus can be damaged and it can be repaired. There's something in the somatic mutation theory, which is this theory of cancer that it originates in the nucleus through defects in your DNA. There's a paradox that discredits that hypothesis, and that paradox is the bowhead whale. The bowhead whale lives for like 200 years. It's the most massive mammalian creature. Right behind the blue whale, you have the bowhead, and it's extremely long-lived. Why doesn't it get cancer? If cancer is an accumulation of defects in the nucleus of your cells, then the bowhead whale should be riddled with cancer by the time it's 80 years old, and it's not. So these researchers at University of Rochester got really curious about that, and they discovered that a cold shock protein is responsible for repairing defects of DNA in the bowhead whale, which is, you probably don't know, spends most of its life in the Arctic Ocean where it's really cold. Then they said, I wonder if that could be happening in human beings as well. Now, this research is like really early stages, but the mechanism that protects the DNA in the bowhead whale exists in human beings too. We have ways to repair those defects in the nucleus. And where does that come from? It comes from the proteins that can be stimulated in the sauna and in the cold plunge. So the mitochondria produce the energy responsible for all the processes inside the cell. But they do something else that's probably more important, and that is signal cell death. In a cancer cell, the mitochondria are dysfunctional, which is why it resorts to fermentation to produce its ATP. But you could say, why is the cancer cell even there? It's in this like deranged metabolic state that is nowhere near as efficient, although it can be faster. If the mitochondria were working, it would shut down the cell. It would signal what's called apoptosis, that is, kill the cell and recycle all the cell materials that could either be expunged from the body or used elsewhere. So don't think of it as detoxification. Think of this as the cold as mitochondrial therapy that will either repair the DNA in the cells that can be fixed or signal the death of those aberrant cells so that they can be removed from the body. In a way, that's a detoxification, but it's not going to get the aluminum out of your bloodstream or something.
Yeah. But if it's increasing the mitochondrial health, then there should be a downstream effect, and then you put yourself into other situations, and like you said, getting into a sauna. Correct. Or just going outside and chopping wood in the Texas heat is probably one of the the sauna is bad at 185 degrees. Going outside in the heat of the day and cutting down trees and doing work is absolutely 1,000 times worse. And then you don't have to deal with
More men should be chopping wood. I have no doubt about that. It's rare in Phoenix to have the opportunity.
Yeah, well, you guys have a lot of cactuses, a lot of dirt. So, Doc, I think that's our time. I really appreciate you coming on and educating us on, cold immersion. I'm a huge fan, and dude, just looking forward to hopefully one day we get a chance to meet. I know Doc Parsley's out there in Scottsdale, so I'll be making a trip out there not too far. So I'm excited to do it.
That's fantastic. It's wonderful to see you online, John. Thanks for having me here. Next time I'm in Austin, I want to look you up.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Thank you.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by ko-fi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.